Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Justice Madden, and thank you for coming today for hashtag Black and Environment Week. We are focusing on getting back Black on the land. This day just highlights the many properties, pathways, and experiences of food, how Black folks have built community, culture, and healing through food, both past, present, and future. So use the hashtag Black to the land to spotlight and celebrate farmers, healers, growers, and stewards who embody our rights to building connection with the earth and telling our stories through the meals we create.
Yes, and we'd like to give a great thank you to our sponsors, Environmental Defense Fund and National Resource Defense Council. We'd like to thank you so much for sponsoring this panel and helping us create this space.
And so, as I mentioned, my name is Justice Madden. I am a graduate student at Virginia Tech's Agricultural Leadership and Community Education. My research focuses on seed, storytelling, and healing and community activism. So I'm really marveled and excited to hear from our panelists today and also to be in conversation and co-moderating with Norman.
Yes, hi, I'm Alexis Norman. I'm based here in San Francisco, California, and I'm a land stewarder or farmer, primarily in small scale organic farming and biodynamics.
Great, and so we're going to start by introducing our illustrious panelists today. I'll start by introducing Chris Bolden Newsome, originally from the Mississippi Delta, is the oldest son of farmers and justice workers, Delmada Bolden Newsome and Rufus Newsome Sr., and is a fourth, excuse me?
Sorry, Demelda.
Thank you, Demelda Bolden Newsome. Got to get it right. And is a fourth generation farmer since emancipation in 1865. In 2010, Chris joined Ty Holmberg in creating the Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden, where Chris co-directs a 3-acre crop field orchard and 60-bed community garden. Sankofa Farm is a spiritually rooted African diaspora, urban-centered farm and youth development program. Following natural agricultural practices, Chris focuses on cultivating healthy soil for life-giving crops while learning and teaching Pan-African practices in farming and foodways. In 2012, Chris married seed farmer Owen Smith Taylor, with whom he co-founded the culturally preservation and rematriation focused seed company True Love Seeds in 2017. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'll introduce Alexa White, a PhD candidate in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Traditionally trained as an agroecologist and biologist, she's interested in biophysical indicators of sustainable agriculture and international climate governance. Alexa works with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to better understand how goal number 2 to end hunger is expected to impact the biological and management of small-scale farms. For her dissertation, she is doing a comparative study between sites in Hawaii and Jamaica. In connection, she is the longtime director of the student organization Climate Blue. Climate Blue's mission is to support the University of Michigan delegation for the UNFCCC Conference of Parties and to educate students and the greater community about climate governance. Alexa has served as a UN COP delegate and attended COP 21 in Paris, 24 in Poland, and 25 in Spain. In addition, she is a researcher for the University of Michigan Sustainability Without Borders Project in Kampala, Uganda, where she works to improve water filtration systems throughout the country. PhD candidate in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, traditionally trained as an, oh, we doubled that one. All right, well, yes, that was Alexa White, everybody.
Hello. And next we'll introduce Dr. Esme Murdough, a professor of American Indian Studies. Her research focus include environmental justice, Indigenous and Afro-descendant environmental ethics, settler colonial theory, and decolonization as land resource matriation. Murdock comes to this work as a descendant of enslaved and European settlers in North America. Her work explores the devastating impacts of colonization and slavery on both Indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples and environments on Turtle Island. She anchors her understanding of settler colonialism, in particular, in the experiences and theorization of Native and Black communities, especially towards securing decolonial futures. She often writes back to mainstream environmental discourse that attempts to read out colonization as the context of environmental degradation and destruction, particularly in settler colonies of the United States and Canada. Her work centers conceptions of land and relating to land found both Indigenous and African-American Afro-descendant environmental philosophies. Murdock has work published in environmental values, global ethics, Hypatia, agricultural and environmental ethics, ethics, policy and environment, world philosophies, and critical philosophies of race. Thank you for joining us.
And then we also have Jayson Porter, Baltimore-born Philadelphian, reared mostly between Arizona and Mississippi. Jayson is a PhD candidate of environmental history at Northwestern University, where he focuses on agrochemicals, oil seeds, and ecological violence in Guerrero, Mexico.
And also we have Sun English Jr., who is a QTPOC herbalist, farmer, educator, mycologist, and ritual performance artist of African and Accomahannic descent from Baltimore. Oh, two Baltimores, yay. They spend their days creating with earth, wood, voice, and metal, whether that be in the family farm, wood shop, metal shop, or the apothecary or mushroom lab. Sun comes from a rich lineage of farmers, resistance fighters, and community gatherers. They are working towards a vision for future that exists beyond the systems of oppression via many different land-based practice projects, Currently, the Liberation Seed Farm in Virginia and the Baltimore Natural Colors Initiative in Maryland. Sun believes that the practice of land stewardship is synonymous with practicing freedom, and they are feeling wonderful to be a part of the turning. Thank you all so much. Wow, I just feel revitalized just by hearing all this amazing work that is being done in this space being shared right now.
Yes, thank you all for being here.
So we'll turn the first question over to Sun and thinking about the ideas of cultural memory and sharing stories, traditions as just a way and a resource for survival. Can you talk about how that intersects with your role as an artist, performer, agriculturalist, and healer, and how engaging in those mediums help you reclaim those traditions?
I feel like I have an immediate answer to that, but I just want to hear that question one more time so I can really like.
Of course. I'll boil it down a little bit more succinctly, but just the way that you see sharing stories and tradition beyond the measure of survival, but in different mediums of reclaiming tradition and also healing.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. So basically, how do I practice remembering?
Yep, through the land and in partnership with the land, and also sharing that out too.
Cool. So I'd say I kind of go through like a little story. So I kind of started my practice of building relationship with land and building relationship with, or I should say just like remembering, or say relationship with my past ancestors and remembering the ways that they did things, my great grandmothers and all that. It started with metalwork actually, and the wood shop. It started with like playing with different shapes and really like opening my mind up to the idea of just like raw creation and not really sketching out things, but really just playing with the scrap metal that I would find left over from other people, kind of recycling that, and you've kind of thinking about the story of that and kind of trying to take that energy into myself, into my own process of creation, and very intentionally like creating shapes while thinking about my ancestors, while thinking about my great-grandmother, while thinking about her herbalism practices, or thinking about some stories, many stories from my mom and my dad about their great grandmothers and amazing magical things that they did. They literally have like magical stories about them. And through that process, and I should say even like the literal flame of welding, that kind of alchemical process, it really felt just like spiritual and connecting to me. And as time kept moving, I moved from just making objects, but then also playing with space with those objects. And that started making me think about stories, and my own like the stories that I can create with these different objects and what each individual object had meant to me. And I'd realized a lot of the objects I had made were literal like epochs of time. Like they were, while I was creating them, they really represented certain epochs of my life or epochs of some ancestor's life. And I would start placing them in spaces in different places, and I would move around those spaces and literally just remember what that object was about, remember what the story was when I was making that object. And I would just kind of like tell that to the people in the space. It was really just storytelling. Storytelling for remembering is really what it boils down to. And then I actually took a big trip to California, and the beauty of being out there was that you have just like all year long flowers and all year long like scents all over the place. And you're commuting from work and you can literally pick fruit from fruit trees and whatnot. And that really inspired me to think about that being a reality for people in Baltimore, because I know that I got a ton of healing from experiencing that, going to work, coming from work, dealing with the microaggressions while I'm going to work and coming from work. It was really nice to pick up a fig from a tree and kind of vent to the fig that I was eating. And that got me really interested in the idea of farming, the idea of creating with life, and not just like metal and wood, but actually creating with like literal life. And it started making me remember when I was little, again, remembering stories. As I was growing up during summer vacation, my mom would always have me out growing plants with her. And she didn't force me to, but she just made it really inspiring to me. And I really loved doing it with her. It was just a fun collaborative thing to do with her. And actually on the farm today, that's still what we're doing. It's kind of like now we've revisited that memory, and now we're like actively working together on the farm. And I just got back from there today, just talking about what we're planting this year, what's going well right now, what went well last year. So yeah, I guess it really all boils down to process and storytelling and remembering, and just like, I don't know, I feel like my hands are like a really strong medium for me, at least, to connect with energy and feelings in a place or in something, or even with people, with the listening and all of that. I don't know where I'm going with this. But after California, I actually got even more interested in not just planting for beauty or planting for edible things, but my dad was actually going through cancer at the time. And so I was really interested in how can I support his radiation therapy, knowing like the damage that causes. How can I use herbalism to kind of counteract those side effects and things like that? And it's been, I think this would be year 5, and as of 2 months ago, he is completely cancer-free. And I'd like to think that that has a lot to do with this mixture. Always have to give credit. I love herbalism, and always have to give credit to Western medicine for its emergency use. And like, radiation therapy, I can't really do that with an herb, but I could definitely use herbs to counteract those side effects. And a lot of people go through that therapy and end up with lack of energy. They end up in a lot more, a lot of pain, muscle aches and things like that. Sometimes they end up with like pseudo Parkinson's kind of. And I'm happy to say that my dad doesn't have any of that. And I really can thank like remembering and storytelling and the inspiration that I had on those days when I felt like I couldn't do the work to grow those things, just remembering that my ancestors did that work through so much more struggle than I have to deal with today. So I don't really have an excuse to not do that work. So it's also a source of strength, that remembering, and that's remembering those stories for sure. Is there anything I haven't answered in that question?
That was beautiful.
Welcome.
I hear the power in healing and remembering in together in community, and that really it anchors all in, that it's not just a one-sided thing. So thank you for that.
Totally.
Yes, so I have a question for Jayson. Working with oil seeds and agrochemicals, which from very beginning of when they were first used at their simplest uses, kind of helping build resilience and kind of nurturing something as it grows. In your work, have you seen any indigenous plant knowledge to help kind of build a resilient community?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult to just kind of isolate those things for an assortment of different reasons. To isolate the Afro and the Indigenous experience, from the archive. So let me situate you guys geographically. So I'm just not just throwing out terms here. So I'm thinking about southern Mexico. I don't know if you can imagine Acapulco on the southern coast of Guerrero, which is on the Pacific Ocean, right? So I'm there, right? And on the eastern coast of Acapulco is known as Costa Chica. And this place has, this region has historically the highest concentration of Afrodescendientes, or people of African descent, in Mexico. And the reason why they are there is largely because of oil seeds. Now, it doesn't start with the African descendants in oil seeds, because you can actually go back to the empire that was formulated by the Aztecs. Now, when the Amuzgo people and the Tlaponec people and the Mixtec people of the coast prior to Spanish colonialization, when they lived and inhabited that coast, they actually were forced to pay tribute to the Aztec empire through cacao, or what is chocolate. So that's an oil seed, right? So fast forward 100 years later, in that same space, Spanish conquistadors and colonists and hacendados and people who own land displaced and forced people of African descent to live in those same places, and not only grow cacao, but to grow cotton. And that continued on until after the independence movement. But this is something really interesting and really cool, is that those populations who cotton growers and chocolate growers were fundamental in the independence movement to actually gain Mexican independence, which is something that you see around Latin America, is the role of Black agricultural laborers in revolution, right? That is something that you see not only at the turn of the 1800s, but you see it in Cuba throughout the 19th century. And people like Aisha Finch has written about this in really brilliant, inspiring ways. So just to why oil seeds? So I mentioned, and I can go into a lot of detail about this, but I won't right now because I want to answer your question. But I just want to make sure that we're situated. After cotton was prevalent and it was kind of the major, it was the commodity around which the political ecology functioned in this region, you had sesame and then you had coconut. So essentially from the 1300s to today, you can map, right, the Black experience to some extent in this region through a chain of oil seeds. So that's kind of how I came to it. Plus you could also track Black populations and Black life and culture and love and flourishing through oil seeds around the Americas and around the world. Honestly, things like coconut and sesame connect melanated people around the global tropics, right? So I think that's something super powerful about looking at oil seeds. So getting to your question about how do you isolate, the lessons and plants of the diaspora with local ecologies and indigenous experience, that's something that I think I'm going to need a whole career to study. Even though things like sesame were domesticated in Africa, the sesame that was domesticated or used in Guerrero, I don't believe at this moment there's a direct connection, even though you can, in South Carolina, there is a more direct connection between the sesame grown, the Benny seed, right? That's grown in South Carolina in the same like rice country, right? That to some extent is very connected to the diaspora directly, right? So to me, in my space, I think capitalism was more the predominant influence, right? But there are oil seeds in Guerrero that aren't necessarily tied to capitalism, right? There are oil seeds that are grown sporadically and are foraged that are used to create soaps, used to create vegetable oils, used to create things for food, right? So it's really interesting in the archive to see where those kind of microclimates where these oil seeds can grow in these very, very arid spaces, very much map on, crossover where you see how people of African descent went from being enslaved to these, the plantation economies of oil seeds to actually using a variety of oil seeds in these ecosystems to live once they either ran away, created freedom, not only for themselves and the community, but the entire nation state of Mexico, which I just make sure that's super freaking clear, right? Because Guerrero is the only state in Mexico named after a president, and that president was the first, not just Afro, but Afro-Indigenous president in the Americas, right? So again, it's hard to parse those two out. And I think that that's something that's common throughout the Americas, but it's different in each space, right? So yeah, we can get into nitty-gritty details about that kind of like historical ecology, but I've taken a lot of time right now. But I hope some of that kind of geographic situating and kind of historical context beyond what I just do was helpful in just framing my response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love the excitement, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm like a super like geography nerd. So as you're saying things, I'm like, yes, I know what you're talking about. So yeah, thank you for that.
And building off of that question and thinking about ethnobotanical knowledge and ecological histories, Dr. Murdock, I'd love to hear about the ways in which kind of what Jayson mentioned earlier about you can trace a thread of the diaspora throughout. Where in your work do you see and research that? And kind of also building on what Sun mentioned earlier about the healing in that. Can you speak to kind of the ways in which healing has been really supported? Because we know that, Black folks were sought after for their agricultural knowledge. And we also know now that there's this deep trauma and embedded disconnect now, right? So in telling these stories, we really are doing justice. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, thank you. I'm so excited and honored to be here. I did want to start by saying that I am speaking from unceded Kumeyaay territory. I saw that there's some people zooming in from Kumeyaay land as well. So I want to acknowledge that and all the sort of beauty and honoring of the ancestors that we can name and not name here, and also the more than human relatives that are abundant in this place. I also wanted to take a brief minute to invite people, if they're comfortable, to join with your cameras on. I really love watching people listen and seeing what they're feeling, what they're maybe confused about. It's really helpful for me, and I love, like, I'm a nodder, I'm a I'm a call and response person. So if that's something that you feel called to do and participate in that way in this talk, that would be really lovely. So yeah, to get to this question, I think relationships to land, healing is so critical, and also just thinking about how we are bigger and more than just ourselves or our families, but we are connected to our ancestors, and those ancestors include the more than human world and lands and waters, which is what I want to say. So in my work, I really look at the way that in Afro-descended philosophies, African indigenous philosophies, as well as American Indian philosophies, there are different cosmologies, different ontologies, and different protocols for relationships to the natural world as relations. And I think that one of the most important things that I've really experienced myself in my primary research site, which is the seacoast of South Carolina at this time, is the presence of land and the way that land shares memory. Land has memory. And I've experienced that firsthand. And I think that that's something that we often lose in these Western dominative frameworks that want to tell us what our relationship is to the land, or what should our relationship should be to the land. And this has been really powerful for me in terms of thinking about the connections that exist between Indigenous philosophies, both in the Afro-descended sense and in the philosophies that are coming from the place of Turtle Island of North America, in terms of thinking about how our relationship as Black people, as descendants of enslaved folks, if that's our experience, has really been framed as this sort of proprietary economic sort of relationship. And I think that there's so much more. Our relationship to land is spiritual. I do think that the land recognizes us and that we build relationships with land based on that recognition, based on that presence. And I talk about this a lot. There's so much amazing scholarship on the role of forgetting and the role of remembering within the African diaspora. And so much of that is related to trees. Especially in the Western African sense, right? So there's ceremonies for forgetting before transatlantic slavery that involves trees. There's ceremonies for remembering and going to the proper, to be reunited with one's ancestors after they pass over as a form of remembering and connection. And in South Carolina, particularly, the people who were targeted for their ethnobotanical knowledge from West Africa were rice people who did multiple forms of ricing, alluvial ricing, coastal ricing, and they actually, the levees they would build for their rice fields would be built from the hollowed trunk of a tree. And that practice traveled and was reproduced in South Carolina as well. So it's really interesting to think about how our relationships to the land form a lineage ancestrally, not only to the people that we're related to, but the lands that we're related to, right? And that travels too, and that is recognized too in different places. So I think that this idea of memory and healing, I think what was really special for me to sort of think about was the way that the land remembers us, the land recognizes us in ways that are necessarily excessive of the story that the United States or Canada or Mexico wants to tell us as Afro-descended people about our place, our connection, and our contribution to whatever this place is that we're calling. So I think that that's been really powerful. And I really do want to talk to Jayson much more about a lot of the things, because I was just thinking of so many connections, and I was resonating with so many of the things that were said, and also with everyone else on this panel. So I think I'll stop there, but thank you.
Yeah, well, as Jayson was giving his answer, Esme, I saw you like shaking your head to a lot of things, and I'm like, yes, we're feeling it. So for Alexa, I have a question for you. For me personally, I only learned about agroecology maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and everyone I met in the field kind of had their own kind of definition on what that was. So I'd really love to hear kind of what agroecology is to you, and have you been anywhere that you really felt kind of put into practice, whether somewhere you've worked or visited that really put into practice agroecology really well?
Yes and yes. So first, I guess I'll bring it back to kind of how I even got connected to agroecology. So my grandfather was a sharecropper. Both of my grandparents were sharecroppers in Texas, and they fled to New Jersey, where eventually I came along. And throughout my childhood, they raised me. I was never in daycare. I had an abusive experience in a daycare, and so my grandparents had to take care of me. And through their knowledge of food and through their experiences as sharecroppers, they used to feed me very specific dietary measures through that knowledge. And so it's definitely impacted my life, and I didn't really get to connect back with it until I reached graduate school. I didn't think that I was equipped enough to kind of bring that into academia, as well as my own imposter syndromes. To bring it back to the definition of agroecology, like everyone else, you can think about this kind of in two ways. So there's a historical context, and then there's contemporary agriculture. And so agriculture came to be around 10,000 years ago. And so when we look into history, we really have to pay attention to the Industrial Revolution. And so that was when the expectation of production outweighed the value of what was being put into these agricultural systems. And so agriculture was no exception. Then came the influence of World War II. And so the soldiers, they often died from malaria and yellow fever. And so these are very insect vector-borne diseases. And so in response, they developed these chemicals that could kill the insects, and they were really successful. But once the war was over, there was no real need for these pesticides anymore. And so the companies then were faced with this underconsumption crisis, where they didn't really want peace. They wanted these pesticides to be used throughout everyone's homes. And so in response, they made pesticides that are now we see in agriculture. And so today, agroecology is understood to have 4 pillars. So there's the traditional knowledge, the science, which was really developed by George Washington Carver, the influence of nature, which had a lot to do with the work of Rachel Carson, and then political action. And so agroecology is a platform for action, for research, and production based off of those 4 pillars. I also want to bring up another kind of point to thinking about the historical context, which is formerly known as food regime theory, which is really important to agroecology. And so it's basically how agriculture has transformed over time. And so we see it in 3 main stages. The first is colonialization. We all know what happened then. Britain was kind of seen as the bigwig of the world and started to bring things to other land masses that didn't belong. Then we move into the Green Revolution. And so that's the injection of cereal crops and Western mechanical technology into the African continent and Asia throughout the 50s and the 70s. And then we come to the age of corporate agriculture, which is where we are right now. We have 93% of the land of agriculturalists are small scale farmers, and yet only 42% of them control the bit of land. So the majority of the land is controlled by these large agribusiness farmers. When we think about the differences in the practices of each of these, we're supposed to be kind of paying attention to the overuse of pesticides and the monocultural arrangements and the typical things that you'll see when you see a farm on television. And I guess that brings me to the most ideal farm that I've seen. So in my early research of my dissertation, I had the opportunity to go to Chiapas, Mexico, where I was on a farm called Finca Aranda. And so it's an agroecological coffee farm that's growing Arabica and Robusta coffee with little to any input. So it's essentially 200 hectares of forest. There's a community that lives within it. And I had the chance to speak with the growers, as well as understand the ecology of what was going on. And it was a very beautiful experience.
Yes, great. Well, Mexico seems to be a theme right now.
And speaking of amazing farms and amazing spaces, and also the spirit of that comes along with it, Chris, this question is directed towards you, and just really kind of anchoring all of the themes that we've heard throughout the responses. I hear like the anchoring idea of like Sankofa, which is incorporated into the name of the farm, which is an idea that expresses the importance of remembrance and going back to the roots. Can you speak about the mission of Sankofa Community Farm and the way that it brings to life what it means to come together to learn through history, growing, consuming, and sharing food, and the way that that works as a freedom path and also a sovereign path?
Yeah, absolutely. But first, giving honor to the Most High and to all of our ancestors on whose shoulders we stand. Well, I could actually just sit here and listen to everybody else talk for so long because this is a feast, yeah, for the mind and for the heart. Sankofa Community Farm was birthed probably about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now. We're located here in sunny Southwest Philadelphia, where we've been planted, for all of that time. But we've gone through many evolutions, and one thing that I really love about the experience of farming, of growing at Sankofa and working at Sankofa is that sort of the evolution of the farm and of our work, for me, has also been a parable for the evolution of sort of our people and the community specifically where we are located in Southwest Philly. So the evolution around learning and reconnecting. We emphasize at Sankofa because we started off, like I said, we didn't start off at Sankofa. We started off, I think, as a community farm and food resource center or some other horrible name that was, very much rooted in a value system that was, frankly, not nurturing, and that had not come out of our community. It started off as a program at the University of Pennsylvania. So we got our liberation probably about 6 years ago from UPenn and from all university systems. And that has just been blessing on top of blessing ever since then. We emphasize at Sankofa, as you noted, Sister Justice, the name is Sankofa, which is part of a larger phase. I'm not going to butcher the phrase in Tree, a language that I do not speak. But essentially, if you translate it into Black English, or at least Black English that I know, it means ain't nothing wrong with going back and fetching what you left behind. And so and I think the powerful part of that is ain't nothing wrong with, because so much of the work that we do, which is around reconnecting, which is around, rematriating, a phrase that we use, rerouting our people to the cultural systems, the cultural tools, and the spiritual systems that have, engendered our survival for people, as a people, for 400 years in this part of North America. So we tell stories through intergenerational work. That's one of our primary methods, because we found that particularly in the urban setting, in Philadelphia, in many ways there's a great disconnect between the generations. We're right now in the middle, like a lot of cities right now in this country, in the middle of a storm of gun violence. It's real bad in Philly right now. I feel like people used to talk about Baltimore the way they're talking about Philly now. And I only highlight that because one thing that I've been told, and I'm not a native Philadelphian, I'm a Mississippian, but one thing that I've told since I immigrated to Philadelphia is that there was a time in which there was deeper connection between the generations, between elders and young people. And for so many reasons, that's been lost, or that's been distorted. And I do believe that that's at the root of so many of our problems, and that is also a huge piece of the remedy and the healing that we need. So we do that. We focus intergenerational, and we have a community garden, which is about 60 beds, which is largely older people, elder retirees. It's a little different than most other community gardens that I know of, in that we try to really create a space for community building in it. Generally, community gardens, at least in Philly, which is a garden city, by the way, you know, a city full of community gardens. You sign up for a community garden in most places, and you know, you drop in whenever you want to, and there may be a meeting or there may be some dues or something like that, but we have monthly classes and meet and greets and dinners where we get our people together, older people with younger people, gay folks with straight people, people from all across the year, people of different religions, you know, and even some, we even have some white people in the garden, you know, not many, but there's certainly, you know, cross-cultural in so many other ways. And we really focus on that intergenerational piece so that there will be sort of the unforced but natural passing on of knowledge and skills in this garden space. We find that our elders, most of them too, because Philadelphia, I mean, you know, Philadelphia is a part of that migration north, you know. I don't use the language great migration because I feel like great is really loaded, and I don't know what we mean when we say great, you know, as a you know, but the movement of Black people from the deep South to the north. Philadelphia is almost all Southern descended for the Black people, and it's a similar. I mean, they come from the same places that the people in Baltimore came from, you know, a lot of times, you know, South and North Carolina, you know, Southern rural Maryland, in the Virginias, you know, in that area. And so what we find a lot of times, our elders are so excited to get back to land. They're so excited to get back to growing food. And when they get out there and you just take them on a walk, it don't take but 5 or 10 minutes before they start telling you about Great Annie, who used to pick rabbit grass and pokeweed and all these other common names. I don't know what they're talking about, because, you know, you use common names, you know, you don't, people say, you know, it's different in every place, right? But I love hearing about these different, you know, remedies and Tangy and how she used it and this sort of thing, you know, and that it just flows naturally when you get on the land, and when you just sort of, it's almost an automatic connection, you know. So we really invest in and lift up those spiritual technologies that we have, you know, that have kind of gone by the wayside in urban life. So that's one of the huge pieces, you know, but I would say that we tell stories, and I say, you know, intergenerational, but we also tell those stories and try to make that happen across space and time. And we do that through ritual movements on the land. And I use the language ritual movements. What I mean by that is, so, you know, I always use this story, this example that, you know, my partner, who is Italian, Irish, you know, he has film reels from the 20s and, you know, in the 30s of his family when they had money before the last big European tribal war. You know, the family had money and they lost it all, but before then they had enough money to be able to take these films. So he can see his great great grandmother, you know, and great and all these, you know, and maybe even 3 greats, you know, and it was something that I was envious of at first, because, you know, I'm an old folks child, and I'm a history kind of cat, like so many of you all on here, you know. And so I said, oh man, gosh, I can't, you know, I have one picture of my great grandmother, and I'll introduce you all here on my my granny and my great grandfather Moses, who was a sharecropper on the land, and my great grandmother Gracie. That's all I have. You know, it's short of a few stories. You know, that's all I have. And so I thought, but then I was recounting this to a sister who told me, she said, well, you know, that's nice to have video reel and all of that, but what you have is deeper than that. You still have the practices. You could eat the way your ancestors ate. You never stop eating that food. You can pray the way your ancestors prayed. You never stop saying those prayers or praying in that way, you know. So that connection. So I think sort of recognizing first and foremost what we have and what we have left too, you know, has been a huge part of what happens at Sankofa. So we try to reconnect. We recognize that our people, you know, for many reasons and in many ways have seen a severing, you know, in that connection. But one way, because see, I'm lucky, I'm blessed in that I could even, you know, that I have pictures of some of these people, and that I have some stories of them. And not only that, you know, even though I may consider it scant compared to some, documentation of the life of my ancestors that other people may have, I know these foods. I know how to prepare them. I know the songs, and I can sing the songs. And but I recognize when I came to Philadelphia, for so many reasons, so many ways, many Black people, at least who I was encountering in Southwest Philly, did not have that. Not the story for everybody, certainly, but in terms of the people who were being drawn to our space, and I don't think that was accidental that they were being drawn to our space, that they didn't have that. And so we recognize that we can reconnect people. We can tell the story not just in words. So we do tell the stories in words. And so we have a whole curriculum called the New Freedom School, modeled on Mama Fannie Lou Hamer's, Freedom School back in the 60s, in the 70s. Incidentally, she's from just a few miles away from my hometown in Sunflower, Mississippi. And I like to imagine she was baptized in the same river that my grandmother was baptized in, the Sunflower River. As well, but so we do that. So we're teaching them the history. So they're going to learn, who Mama Harriet is. They're going to learn about Nat Turner. They're going to learn about Denmark Vesey. They're going to learn about Fannie Lou Hamer. They're going to learn about Nanny in Jamaica, because we're diaspora and we're African diaspora rooted farm, which means that our focus is on the African story, the story of Africans here in formerly British North America. We also want to make that connection to Africans all over the world. So we tell that story. So we tell that story, right, in terms of the narrative piece of it in lots of different ways, in educational sense. But what has been more powerful, I think, is to tell the story on the land with people. And so a ritual movement, I don't know my great-great-grandmother's name maybe, but I can show you how to swing this hoe in a way that most assuredly she swung that hoe. I can show you how to weed in a way most assuredly that she weeded. I don't have those actual, I don't have the data points of who they are and where they lived and all of that. That was taken from us in many ways, and for a lot of us. But through those ritual movements, through teaching the songs, as we work on the land, through prayer, so we are a spiritually rooted farm as well, spiritually centered farm, we like to say. And so for us, that means that we're not telling people necessarily how to pray, but we are showing them that this is important. And then when you come on our land, you don't just rush up on our land. We don't come for a work day. Everybody who comes to our land must first and foremost greet and honor all of the beings that live there and that are part of that. I love so much too that Sister Esme talked about our relatives, and our relatives, human and otherwise, that we have to honor them as well as the spiritual forces there. And then first and foremost, of course, the Creator, who we have held on to and who has held on to us. And so that's, in a nutshell, that's really what we do. So we're teaching. So we're trying to reverse a lot of what I have seen. When I came north, I was really surprised. And I've been here a long time now, probably about 20 years. But I was really surprised to find a lot of animosity towards the idea of farm work. That was new to me, because I come from a place where people still grow food, They were forced to grow food, but when they got out of slavery, they continued to grow food. And even in my town of, in the thriving metropolis of Greenville, Mississippi, which I'm sure all of you have heard of and visited before. Okay, you did, brother? Okay, all right. We have to talk about that, because I saw that Mississippi, my eyes lighted up. But, so yeah, even in the thriving metropolis of Greenville, Mississippi, many, if not most folks, especially if there's old folks in that house, will have a patch of mustard greens growing in that front yard. And for me, that's a sign that we will survive. You'll see a bottle tree if you go out into the country, most surely. So in our space, we also have erected a bottle tree. Bottle tree, for those not familiar, is we take a tree, and usually it's a dead tree, or a tree that's fallen rather, and we set it up, and then we sort of hang bottles. Sometimes they can be different colors and that sort of thing, or other items and things to catch things, bottles, little pots in there. And in the country, they do that to catch evil spirits and influences that might be going in front of your house. So I brought that tradition to us, and so we keep that alive. But we really, really try to honor the land where we're planted, recognizing that the trauma of what happened to us on the land was not the fault of the land, And I think that gets conflated and that gets confusing, particularly if if you are 2 or 3 generations removed and settled here in a northern urban situation without the benefit of the beautiful and powerful stories of the lands, you know, where we as African Americans were created. You know, I say very specifically because to me, like Africa for me is a motherland, but homeland is where my people are planted. And so, you know, so to be able to have that relationship, you know, just recognizing that trauma is there, that we have to do the healing in really specific ways, and we have to do it in a context that makes sense to people, but also do it in a way that sort of steps up the game and reintroduces them to something. Because even when people don't know the details of that, even when they don't, even, you know, I have some young people who've never had a black-eyed pea in their mouth, you know. They come to me, and I had a little girl come, you know, and everybody was talking about sweet potato pie, and she pulled me to the side and said, "Mr. Chris, I'm sorry, you know, I've never tasted sweet potato pie. Can I have some when you make it?" You know. And it's just, you know, it's like, wow, you know, but again, like, so that's the work, you know, and it's reconnecting, and it's very simple, and it's very, you know, it doesn't seem like revolutionary, but it has been so powerful in the lives of so many people here in our space. And I'm gonna shut up here, but I do want to also pay homage to the natural agricultural practices that we use, because it's also a part of our storytelling. Somebody mentioned agroecology. I think that's the same thing as natural agriculture. Agroecology is a newer phrase for me, to be honest, but from what I've read, it's essentially this practice that we first and foremost honor the soil. We recognize in growing that we're not growing plants. We are working, cooperating with the soil that we come from and that we're going to go back to, right? So we will focus, you know, maybe less on the aerial parts, you know, of the plant, and more on the health of the soil. And what we find is that in natural agricultural practices, which very much of the practices that our ancestors used in Africa and beyond, when you talk about the hollowed out tree stumps, I love that those sorts of things, using what's there in that closed loop system, you know, and recognizing that you are a part of it. So the honoring of the beings and the honoring of spirits as you are is a huge piece of it. Reverence of this for the soil, which means that we keep the soil is never bare. The soil is always mulched or covered with something, with some cover crop. We believe in constant cropping, even if that cover crop is grass. You know, we're not obsessed with the eradication of weeds, because, you know, Spirit told me a long time ago, I working in that field, that, you know, the way y'all talk about weeds and it's so-called invasive species, that's the way they talked about us, you know. So, you know, I think so in keeping with that. So, you know, it doesn't mean that we let them run wild, but some people who come to our space are very surprised, you know, that we don't strive for these absolutely pristine, sort of barren military style roads, you know, but we grow in the sort of in the, you know, as the earth sort of tells us. So that means if we are making a row and it's straight, but we find as you're hoeing, sometimes you'll find as you're hoeing that row curves. That row wants to curve, you know, and so we let it curve and we go with that, you know, and we keep the seeds that we've grown, because those seeds tell a story, and we keep the stories of those seeds. And we recognize that when you grow a seed crop out consistently in your space, that the seed also remembers what you tell it. The seed remembers what happened as well on that land. So our storytelling is multi-layered, and we're really blessed to do it.
Thank you so much for that. There were so many nuggets and weaves and threads, but it all anchored down to the act of moving, remembering, being in community, and just what that pathway does for creating our own value systems outside of oppression and outside of barriers and glass ceilings. So thank you so much for everyone for sharing that. We are going to just encourage folks, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We have a few more moments with our panelists here, and we really want to make sure that we're sharing this space with you all to engage as you see fit. If not, Norman and I also selfishly came prepared as well. Oh, I see that Nicole has a question. Oh yeah, of course, if you'd like to come off mute, that works.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yay. First off, this is like, I am so full right now. I need like a part 2 through 10. Like, this is amazing. Thank you all so much for being here for this wonderful conversation, and just knowing more about each of you and your work has just really inspired me and given me more strength to get through the rest of this year, and even just moving forward with the changes that I'm making in my life. And really honing in on giving myself space and time to heal. And like, this is doing that for me. So by the way, my name is Nicole. Sorry, I'm like into it, but like, my name's Nicole. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also helping out with the Black and Environment event. So I'm just learning so much. So I'm really just like super giddy and like fangirling, but also at the same time, this is very healing space. So I just wanted to know from Sankofa, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on person's name that was talking about the Sankofa garden.
Yeah, Sankofa.
Yeah, Sankofa. Just wanting to know a little bit more about your kind of the work that you're doing with the garden, but also in the community. And you're talking about the violence, like it's increasing and it's gotten worse. How has that space helped people in the community kind of reconnect to the importance of healing through land?
Well, boy, we'd be here all night if I would have come up with all of the stories, but the one that just pops immediately to mind, and thank you for that question, Nicole, is one that I kind of tell often. We in our community garden space, and they're 5 by 10 beds, you know, where people can go. So that's on one side, and then of course the farm, the crop field is on the other side of the road. But in our community garden, there was a family. In fact, they were neighbors. Mom and daughter were neighbors of mine at one time. I lived in Southwest Philadelphia until very recently, and I moved on up to Germantown. Yeah, so right, people know Philly area, right? You can know that joke. But you know, but lived for years in Southwest Philly, and this neighbor of mine and her daughter had gotten a community garden. I finally convinced him, come on now, Miss Doris, and get a community garden. So you know, she tarried for a while, and then she came on out and she got a bed, and she would have a daughter out there working in the bed sometimes too. Daughter had a lot of had been labeled as a child with behavioral problems, you know, for a lot of reasons. I think she definitely was a different learner in a lot of ways, and a lot of folks didn't know how to deal with her. I loved her to pieces, but so they would work out there in that space together in that garden. They were so excited to be growing their own food, and she would just, sometimes she didn't even care what she grew. She just grew it all. Like, what do you do with all that beans and greens and tomato? What do you got? She said, I just throw it all in a pot, Mr. Chris, and I make soup out of everything, you know. And so that went on for some years. I didn't know the story of that family, but that mom had been in semi-estrangement from her own mother because of you know, some traumatic past or whatever. I still don't know the stories behind it, you know, families, you know, love and pain. And so she had been in estrangement, but apparently grandmother had found out about this community garden, no longer lived right in the neighborhood, but she wanted to get a bed too. So she came to me, and I didn't know her connection at first, you know, and then eventually they let me know, oh, you know, by the way, that's my daughter and my granddaughter who are coming. And so their beds were not far from one another. It's a big open space. You have to see other gardeners as they're working. They had been estranged for many years. And because of coming together and having to work on that space at their community gardens, and not, you know, and sometimes bumping into each other, they had to talk to each other. They had to see each other. And this being together gave granddaughter an opportunity to work with her grandmother, you know, and to spend that time with her grandmother. This is not an experience that a lot of Philadelphians have anymore. Now, Philadelphians 40, 50 years ago, when they first started moving to Philadelphia from South, yeah, that happened, you know, when people were moving into homes and houses, you know, and not into apartments and things like that, you know, folks were growing their own food. And so you had those over, but that has not been the case for so long. It's certainly not in our part of town. And so that being together in that space alone created an opening, you know, for some sort of healing to happen, and for the best type of intergenerational healing to occur. And so as a result, then these three women were all working in this space together and had now had to reconnect. Some years after that, you know, and that means that I got to meet the family. And so eventually then the brothers started coming, you know, because I think none of them were talking, you know, brothers started coming, you know, and cousins. And so they all, a few years later, sadly, grandma made her transition from this world. And I went to go visit her, you know, on her sick bed. And I saw that, much to my surprise, that her daughter and granddaughter also had been making regular visits, you know, to the hospital. And so this occasion, a way for them to reconnect before grandmother made her way out of this world. So to me, that's one of the more powerful stories. And that, you know, maybe that's not a huge deal. And, you know, I think but for me, it was powerful because I knew these people, you know, and because that's the type of, you know, that's the type of power that working together on the land can bring, you know. And I don't know if any of these people had it. No, I know for a fact they hadn't had. I don't know about grandmother, but they all were Philadelphians, had been born here, and I don't know if any of them had the experience of growing food before that. But certainly that growing food together and doing it, you know, even under the circumstances of their disconnection, forced them to come back together. And so in that way, the land, which at one time, you know, been the scene of the crime for us, all of us, you know, was also the scene of great healing.
Thank you for that beautiful story. Oh, I'm with Nicole on this one. It's giving me so much life, and I'm feeling so nourished by this conversation. And keeping with the theme of growing and our connection with plants, we do have a question from the audience about what experiences do any of you all have with African descendant crops, whether it be through your research or growing, and how has that kind of story of that crop and cultivating that crop shaped you? And we can open this up for
it's just any of the panelists as well.
I have an answer for that. I've worked with a lot of different plants, but the one that stands out for me that I've had like an ongoing 4-year long relationship with now is indigo. And we actually work on a project here in Baltimore called the Nature's Colors Initiative. And we basically grow a lot of natural dye plants, but the main one that's probably like 70% of what we grow is indigo. And it's been wonderful to grow that relationship over 4 years, not just with the plant, but along with the people that were also interested in the plant. It was a really serendipitous thing, and also goes to show like the power of spirit and serendipity and the power of our ancestors making these things happen. But the people that I work with, actually, we all serendipitously like left the places that we were living at in different states and everything, and just somehow came to Baltimore and ended up contacting each other through like weird networks of friends, and then just all started working on this project. And now we're 4 years going, and have been just like very powerful at growing indigo for the people of Baltimore, for the children of Baltimore, to like teach them that our ancestors created, you know, this color. It's not some like white dude that created denim and blue jeans. And like, you know, it's something that's like a very spiritual plant, a very healing plant for our people. And there are just so many practices around it on the motherland. And it was a wonderful thing for me too, as someone who wasn't even familiar with the plant at all coming out here. I was just interested in natural dye. I was already doing all that spiritual work. So I was like, indigo, that sounds great. Like, that sounds like something that can be infused in my art practice. And to actually put my hands, actually process the dye and take your hands out and actually have those blue hands. I feel like, speaking of that, remembering and that storytelling, like that was a whole moment for me, like having those blue hands. I just kind of like, I don't know, you just feel that rush go through your body. Those goosebumps show up, like, you know, all the, you just feel that, like right now talking about it, I'm actually feeling it. But Yeah, I guess to answer your question, I'm just speaking to like the power of working with like our ancestral medicine and the power of building that relationship with it. Every year, every day that I work with, every time have my, I'm like waist deep in it. It's just like a beautiful thing. And then when it comes like we harvest twice a year, I believe it's like July and another one in September, or about like August, and it might go to October, depending on the weather and how things go. But it's beautiful to bring the community around and just have so many people collecting these flowers, these leaves, these seeds, the children that come around, just like like you talked about your Sankofa farm, just like this multi-generational experience is just such a healing and beautiful thing, especially for our people, because we really need that. And I feel like, even going to what you were saying, Nicole, I feel like I'm happy you asked that question, because I feel like that is what's going to heal our communities, is that the rituals that have been lost that bring our people together. And I feel like we've had a lot of repeat people through those years. And I know that they look for that healing in July or August or September and October to be together and to harvest all that material. And then to also go to our space that is independently owned, by us Black people in the community, to go and process that stuff at Blue Light Junction here in Baltimore. And then the company that kind of like oversees us is also Black owned. So it's like this beautiful thing. And, they don't really tell us what to do. We're kind of just like in constant conversation. And it's just a wonderful thing to like not be tethered to, like you said, universities or institutions, and be Black people that are actually free to do what we want to do with other Black people and other Black institutions in our, locale. So anyway, the power of medicine, the power of roots and plants. Yes.
Yeah, I love everybody's like just spirit when they're speaking, and how it's like trickling into everybody in the audience. They're like really feeling it. So thank you everyone again for being here and just like giving us your time and your energy and just sharing your stories with us. We want to open up one more question.
Sorry, can I just say like a 5-second thing that's just really, I feel like really important
please.
about that? One of the people on our team is Korean, and it's really beautiful to talk about the synergy also between cultures, and like have so many conversations between that. And also, speaking of the multi-generational thing that happens, also we get a lot of the Korean people coming out and also telling their stories about their ancestors that worked on and how they immigrated here. You also just find like how so many of these stories intertwine, and like, maybe my great so met your person who was also in such and such state at that time. And it's just this beautiful thing. And it's just, yeah, plants. There's so much there.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the kind of final question to everybody. If you could share like a short story, or even like a word of something that's kind of giving you hope and kind of your growing space or your educational space of plant knowledge. It's open to anyone who wants to chime in.
I can talk again if no one else wants to talk a little bit. Anybody else want to talk a little bit?
Talk again, brother. Talk again.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I think we're on year 3 now with Liberation Seed Farm in Prospect, Virginia. It's right outside of Farmville. Some people are a lot more familiar with Farmville, Virginia, so I say that too. And it's a really beautiful thing, like I said, to be working with my mother again, with plants, building that relationship with land that I was unfamiliar with for a very long time. We've had that land for about 20 years and didn't really start even moving to it or even working on it till about 4 years ago, actually. And it's been amazing to, like you said, try to make those rows straight, and then actually just letting them curve, just listening to the land. And and even making mistakes, because when I first got there, I made a lot of mistakes. I think that's something we need to talk about too, is like allowing ourselves as farmers and as caretakers of the land to make mistakes too, because that's definitely happened. And even making a ritual out of like how you heal the land from your mistake and even heal yourself from that mistake simultaneously. And that's kind of the beauty of farming too. It's just that simultaneous relationship of healing with the earth and yourself and your community and your people and your family, et cetera, et cetera. And God, I've lost track of the question because I just started spilling off. Oh, what I'm excited about with my space. That's right. So what I'm really excited about this year with my space actually is mycology. So far the space is like, got a lot of medicinal herbs and all of that because I'm a big herbalist person. And that's like how I spread my healing to the community, is through teaching herbalism and stuff like that. But what I've gotten into for the last few years is growing mushrooms, and I've made a few fruit blocks for people in the community. But now I'm really excited to actually like grow like rows of mushrooms on my farm, and like really like teach Black people just like the hundreds of pounds that you can grow of mushrooms in like a single bedroom. You don't even need land for mushrooms. You can feed your whole community with a bedroom. And so yeah, I'm just really excited to introduce more mushrooms in the space, not only for ourselves as humans, but also for that soil, getting back to the land. That's what's really important to me, is like taking care of that soil, because nothing's going to grow without that soil being right. Again, like getting to those roots. And yeah, and also like, I feel like soil is a funny metaphor because it's invisible to us. We don't really know what's underneath there, but we know we need to take care of it, right? And there's a lot of that in ourselves that's invisible that we need to take care of. And so I'm always reflecting the earth to myself and yeah, my own stuff. So another thing I'm excited about is bringing more people to the space on the farm too, because it's been very much local, like, just the local neighborhood. I'm really excited, and I've been really fearful actually too, of like, how do I bring people to the space? Because it isn't like, it's off of 95. It's not like off of a main highway. But I'm really excited to bring people to the space and have them experience just like a small little Black family making something out of 4 acres of land. And yeah. I just want to bring people. I want to tell more stories. I'm really excited to bring art to the space, bring like art groups and performers to the space for more storytelling, for more ritual movement. I like that word, more ritual movement, for more song. I love singing. I love voice. I'm also one of those like plant and sing people.
That's right.
So I'm excited to have that in group and in ceremony as well. Yeah. And also excited to collaborate with anybody in this space right now as well, so we're at the beginning of the year, a lot can happen.
I for sure am definitely going to harass you because you started talking.
We have someone in the chat also saying that they have a farm not too far too. So we love these connective threads. So we'll definitely connect accordingly.
Yes,
yeah, people are dropping their information. So please share, connect.
Love it.
Alexis said you'll go next, so please share.
Yeah, definitely. So my dissertation work is in Hawaii and Jamaica. And so I'm really excited to kind of in connection to this talk, thinking about how we can think of agroecology across different cultures. And so these kinds of oral histories and the traumas, as well as the beautiful aspects of what connects us to the land, are definitely seen throughout the world. I'm happy to go to Jamaica to think about how the African diaspora has affected Caribbean islands, as well as go speak to Native Hawaiians about basically reestablishing their control over the agriculture. In Hawaii, there's a huge deficit. So they import 90% of their food. They don't grow their food anymore. And so there are a lot of social movements in Hawaii centered around bringing back that traditional knowledge and creating a space where they can actually sustain themselves without the need of agribusiness. And so that is connected to another thing that I'm really excited about, which is just activism. And so participating in spaces like these, I'm traditionally a scientist, so all the things that I talk about usually don't connect back to my Blackness and don't connect back to my spirituality. And so I'm very happy to explore that. A friend of mine and I are actually creating a think tank that's centered around environmental justice. And so bringing scientists and connecting them to grassroots environmental justice organizations from the aspects of energy justice and food justice. And so I'm really excited to speak to people from many different organizations and just blend all of the science in with the activism.
Yes, like, yes, this is lovely.
And then I think, Jayson, you said that you'd go next.
Yeah, I'll go. I'm going to keep it brief because something I'm excited about doing more is listening and shutting up as praxis. I talk a lot in my life, and I've stopped doing as much talking this year, and it's been super, super helpful for me. So I want to finish talk about my grandmother and my great-great-grandmother, who are actually from Maryland. They live in Philadelphia. My grandmother does. Because as a writer, I get emotional thinking about it. You know, I really want to write things that make people want to go outside. You know, we spend so much time trying to create digital space, and I think I just want to write things that make people want to go outside. And I also want to make sure that my Nana can read everything I can write, and it resonates with her. And that really matters to me. So I called my Nana today just to get ready for this, and call my Uncle Lefty, my great-great-grandfather was one of the first Black man in Maryland to own land. Charles H. Spencer, he owned land in Snow Hill, Maryland on the Eastern Shore. And he was a pastor and a farmer. And a lot of what you guys have said is tied to spirituality. And, you know, one thing my Uncle Lefty and my Nana told me today, and it's something that, you know, as I'm finishing my dissertation in a couple months, I defend on July 26th, and I start 3 years of postdoc at Brown University and the University of Maryland thereafter. I actually haven't announced that until right now. But one thing I really was inspired by them today was this idea that the land was given to us by God. And it was through like faith that they knew that they could use the land to continue and persist and persevere. And I thought that was so powerful because it reminded me of the farmers I look at, the Black farmers I look at in Southern Mexico, are so poor and have to give most of their crops to like these big companies, but they always give crops to the Virgin of Guadalupe, the patron saint of peasants, no matter how poor they are. And that just, and I haven't looked at that in my dissertation. And that hit me today talking to my grandmother, a huge hole in my dissertation, talking to my grandmother. So to me, that's the purpose of making sure that my shit is always that type of conversation, you know? And it just made me super excited about all the room I have to grow and all I gotta learn. I talk so much and I'm so many places. So like, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk with you more in private. And I'm gonna end with that here, but I'm excited about continuing to write from my grandmother, so.
Wow, thank you for your vulnerability. That was beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, and you're getting lots of congratulations in the chat, so I want to say it out loud. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You want to go next on your, oh, I didn't say name, sorry, Dr. Murdock, do you want to go next on yours?
Sure. I feel like that was a great segue to what I want to say, which is basically that I feel like in our dominant society, they're always telling us that the land is the same, it's interchangeable, it's fungible, it's a commodity, but it's not. It's alive. It has its own power. It has its own personality. Different places have their own power and their own personality. So I just like to say something that's hopeful for me is like, go out, like touch the land, right? Like be present and things will happen. Like I totally believe in that. That's happened to me repeatedly. And I think that just having an awareness and being open to that is really important moving forward. And it's so healing, honestly. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
And Chris, can you please round us out? Please tell us something that gives you hope, inspiration.
Oh my gosh. Well, first and foremost, this conversation, I do, just like Brother Jayson said, I do a lot of talking in my life too. I do a lot of talking, and I think it's kind of part and parcel of the fact that sadly, we on this call are part of what should be a much larger group of people in this country and in the world who are actually putting our hands on African people's cultures in the ingenious ways in which we have developed and evolved them, particularly as it relates to food and land work. So that this first and foremost is giving me, a life and a lot of hope right now. And it's my prayer that God will just bless the seeds that we're planting right now, and that they will bear fruit, 50, 60, 100 times over in all of our lives. A thing that's given me hope outside of this conversation and conversations like it, I think it's just the slow work of reconnecting our people, rerouting our people, to this, and it's there's a lot of fits and starts, and again, I think so much of what's come up in this conversation has really showed me that we are not working alone. Sometimes we got our head down, and are just trudging away and doing the work in our little corners of the world, but I think it's so important to know that right now too, it was God and our ancestors that brought us together in this space. You put the call out, Justin and Justice and Norman, but this was supposed to happen, and it's supposed to happen, I think for a greater good. And so just sort of that slow work of that. And I have a couple of my seed, you can't see them because of how this works, but I whenever I talk, I always talk with my seeds. I always bring my seeds with me. Always. I want to give that gift to people. Some of you may already do this, but as making yourself a little power bag, to carry with you that has in it, and that's deeper than our people's tradition, of things, that as you pray, they come to you and you put that in your bag. And for me, amongst the things that are in my bag are the traditional seeds that I know that I come from. So I got the crowd of pea. The crowd of pea is making me excited, and getting Black folks in Philadelphia to get reconnected to the crowd of pea and the whole field pea family, butter beans and okra, and pecans, which I know don't grow here that much, but I would be lost without them. I hear that during, the awful trail of tears, that one thing that helped people survive was that it happened to be a year in which there were plentiful pecans. Pecans and nuts in general don't make every year. Nut trees have this sort of cycle, this internal calendar, right? Some of you all may know, right? And so they don't bear fruit every year. But when they do, it's bonkers, it's so much. And that alone was one of the ways that people were able to survive. So I think about the survival that are in our seeds, and sometimes it seems like, oh man, where's this going? People aren't listening, people aren't, but it's story by story, it's person by story, by person, and community by community. And I'm really, really blessed and enriched for this spirit, for this sort of this spiritual time that we had together. So yeah, all of that, the seeds, and all of you all of you seeds are really, really getting me very, very excited and hopeful right now. And I want to also ask people to remember Ethiopia and Sudan in your prayers, the war in Ethiopia and Sudan, since we're not hearing about any other wars right now, other than what's going on in Eastern Europe. But Ethiopia has been fighting for 5 years. They're dying. They don't have basements to hide in, and they do not have other countries that will receive them. So keep Ethiopia in your prayers, because if we lose her, then we've lost so much.
Wow, thank you, everybody. Like, if I wasn't hopeful before, I've found so many different reasons and inspiration to keep going and doing this work. So thank you again to everybody.
Yes, and we're receiving the same echoing of joy and fullness in the chat, and also love of nut trees. So we just want to say thank you all. and just ensure that there aren't any other questions from our guests before we wrap, or not guests, excuse me, but from the folks who have joined us before we wrapped up. Okay.
Yeah, and a reminder that this is recorded, so anyone who wants to come back to it, we will be sharing it through our network. So thank you again.
Yes, and then a reminder just to do the feedback survey. But thank you all so much. When can we meet again? When can we meet again? We can certainly share the connection. I think there were several social media handles, emails, and for the panelists who also want to connect with one another, happy to make those introductions for you guys as well. But thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, day, wherever the sun is where you are. I hope that it's filling you with warmth or helping you go to sleep. Have a good one. Thank you all.
Wonderful night to everybody. Thank you for this.